Freedom of speech as a principle is very different from the setup and capabilities of freedom of speech on social media. The former operates on deliberation with constrained social setting. The latter operates at a mass scale, at near zero cost, without the social and institutional frictions that give the principle its democratic value. But also note, this is not a resolution for the future type of debate. This is about the assessment of truth that exists contemporarily. And on another note, we want to call out the case coming from CO, right? Because primary cause does not have to mean that they are the only cause or the single root cause in the first place. Because in the social complex phenomena, causation is often plural and structural, not linear. Like for example, wars have multiple primary causes like security dilemmas, ideology, economic pressure. This is common sense. That's why CO's disingenuous case, even in the best case, is clearly unresponsive to the three themes that we have, but rather they are being mitigatory with a new condition that isolates themselves within this debate. This is the sphere of whether X is true or not. So moving the goalpost is really unstrategic, especially you need to respond to a lot of truth value, even coming from OG, because we can just simply say that CO's case is actually true, that it's one of the primary causes, but we can also say that OG in CG's case is also true, because again, they're really unresponsive to their own burden to disprove that this is not a primary cause in itself, rather than moving the goalpost that, this is the better primary cause. This debate is limited on the effect and cost in digital space, so I want you to take note on how this really sparks and how the problem exists in the first place. First push. Why do we outscale other teams just by the context alone on how freedom on social media transpires? The pathway to victory for CG is clearly laid down on the silver platter by Joseph. That is, you need to look at the model patterns that we have in digital space, which is reflected on the infighting caused by the large Bible of bad faith actors, which delimits and manipulates the way we have utilized social media. That is, the fact that politicians can just flood trolls, flood harmful rhetorics, which then feeds each other's confirmation bias, and then we will all to fight within each other. This is the lens that we have cleared out in a THBTX debate. The fact that our freedom of speech is controlled by social media patterns because on how we react on it, which inevitably causes descriptive extreme political divide, i.e., it's a digital space where you can have loads of confidence because you don't have the innate setup, which forces you to rationalize when you're arguing with someone in front of you. It's easy for you to look at the news. For example, it just simply scroll out. Like for example, you're riding the bus, you are on your way to work, and it's easy for you to get all of this extreme effect simply because of how social media set it off for us. So again, just ask yourself the basic mechanism question. How do we have this in the first place? And then I'm going to talk about this in the second push. Closing government wants to be clear here. Freedom of speech on social media is a primary cause of extreme division because political actor and misinformation are merely instruments, but the speech architecture of digital platform is the generative mechanism that enables, scales, and normalizes mass antagonism in the first place. OG talked about why it amplifies it, but it doesn't really prove why it's the primary cause in the first place. That's why opening clash is really soft, and the only case coming from them is algorithm. But that doesn't create extreme polarization, it just amplifies it. Our case is that social media freedom of speech creates polarization by collapsing conditions required for rational disagreement. Like, for example, in digital space, speech is detached from accountability, social cause, and interpersonal friction. This allows bad faith actors coming from Joseph, like Trump, Duterte, and others to inject simplified, emotionally loaded narratives during your free time when you scroll on social media directly into mass consciousness. Crucially, this is not persuasion through argument. It is identity formation through repetition and visibility that you can have simply because they overload it and they have the capacity to overload it. Once ordinary users opt in through comments, share, reactions, and performative expression, the system no longer reflects opinions. It produces them for these people on the middle ground. People do not become polarized because they are convinced by evidence, but because participation itself rewards alignment, hostility, and certainty. And I want to note, a lot of social media context right now is limited on the extreme left or the extreme right, and there's a little bit context towards the middle ground. Like, it only existed, let's say, in 2020. So freedom of speech here is not just a neutral expression. It is the mechanism by which undecided individuals are sorted, hardened, and locked into opposing identities. So why does Ops stomp on the fact that without freedom of speech, social media is going to be bad? Maybe ask yourself why it's bad and polarized in the first place. This response owes soft clash and CO's intuitive extension. Here's the thing. opposition case fails because it relies on the premise about freedom of speech. They argue that freedom of speech still meaningfully exists, therefore it cannot be the primary cause of division. But if freedom of speech were truly intact and self-correcting in the first place, we would not need to fight so hard to protect this in the first place. The very reason minority chambers, safeguards, and protections are necessary today is because freedom of speech is being structurally distorted and constrained in digital spaces for the average people. This is why Joseph's POI to LO is really, really crucial, because it exposes that opposition case only works in a world wherein we all have the kumbaya, good faith, rational actors. But social media, as a model, as a pattern, is not populated primarily by such actors. But for that, I'll take the POI.
You concede that narratives like eat the rich are both widespread and difficult to regulate. We agree, but we claim that when people feel like their freedom is ripped away from them, they defer to platforms with more of this and they internalize it to a greater extent, which means we agree with you, but we actually prove the relationship to freedom of speech and its removal.
Okay, this is the biggest flip on this case. Why is the structural reason of the setup and differences is important in this debate? This is where we put ourselves in the extreme burden here. The central question in this debate is not whether disagreement will not exist without social media, but how disagreement is structurally produced in different environments. Before social media, freedom of speech operated through institutions, newsrooms, political parties, schools, and communities. That slowed discussion, filtered extremes, and forced argument to be framed in ways that others could contest. Social media, in terms of using your own freedom, removes these mediating structures and replaces them with constant low-cost mass expression where speech is immediate and in public with endless repeatable action. Once freedom of speech takes this form, polarization no longer depends on specific political events or elite manipulation. It becomes self-generating, and that's the problem on your side, because only ordinary voters through likes, comments, and shares to participate on this, not to deliberate, but because they are hardened in this position in the first place, because it's easy for you to just like, comment, and share this content that confirms your existing biases or maybe creates new biases for you. That's why this is the primary cause that we have extreme division, because other factors like inequality, misinformation, bad faith politicians matter, but they only become socially destabilizing within a system that continuously reproduces antagonism at a scale that is far, far more different in the digital space. Remember, this debate is about the assessment on how this digital space transpired in the first place. Propose.